Welcome to the Heal Your Hunger Show, where we get to the heart of why you overeat and how to stop. If you struggle with food and weight like I did, welcome home. Welcome everybody to the Heal Your Hunger Show. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for tuning in. You will love my guest today. Kristen Ulmer is a very well-known, famous extreme skier, and she was known for 12 years as the top woman extreme skier in the world. And she's amazing, and she's a beautiful soul, and she has transformed her life experiences into an amazing really body of work around helping people to address and use fear in their life to better themselves in their lives. And she's written a book called The Art of Fear, which is an amazing book. I've just only started reading it, so I'm going to be mostly learning from her today, just as you are, about fear. As you know, as emotional eaters, fear is a huge component of what drives our disordered eating. And I know it was for me for years. And even though I still have fear, fortunately, it's a part of my life, and I'm hopefully going to be learning today how to better use it to be more effective in my life. But the bottom line is you can't avoid addressing it and facing it if you truly want to overcome emotional eating. It's vital that you make peace with fear and use fear in this constructive way that Kristen's going to share with us. So welcome, Kristen. So happy to have you here.
Really happy to be here as well.
Yeah, it's great. And congratulations on your book. It's amazing and quite a feat, I know, having written one myself. So I just love this topic. I love what you're up to and how you're helping people deal with fear, because it is so pervasive and so overlooked and really, I think people are afraid of fear. Is that correct?
Yes, we become most afraid of all of fear itself, which is interesting because there's a lot of things to be afraid of in this world, and fear shouldn't be one of them.
Right. It's kind of counterproductive, I suppose. So talk to me about, as I began reading your book, it was very compelling because of your background as an extreme skier. And I just think that in and of itself is amazing. My mom lives in Aspen, and so sometimes I make it out there during the X Games, and I watch these amazing skiers do what they do. And it's almost scary just to watch, but this is, how did you get into the skiing?
I got really lucky when I was younger. Somebody handed me a pair of skis when I was young, and I happened to grow up in a small town. I always say that the best skier in the world is sitting around a dung fire in Africa right now, and they're going to go their whole lives without ever seeing snow. It's just the right opportunity, the right personality, the right kind of relationship with fear, especially if you're going to do a dangerous sport like extreme skiing. I just was the perfect alignment of all these things. And, but most of all, just luck, that somebody handed me a pair of skis.
That's amazing. And then tell me just briefly what extreme skiing really involves.
Extreme skiing is not an Olympic event. It's the best make films. They jump off cliffs. They do crazy tricks. They ski, you fall, you die, descents. Basically, if you're doing something in the mountain on a pair of skis where you could die, that's extreme skiing. Okay.
That's what it sounds like. Wow, that's remarkable. And was it, it's obviously a thrilling sport, but you, as you described in your book, weren't in touch with your fear when you were doing it.
I was doing what everybody seems to teach and has been taught, which is, the language, conquering, overcoming fear, letting it go, rationalizing it away, like using our intellect to understand it. Like emotional intelligence is seen as in our society is our ability to understand our emotions and control them. And I was really, really good at doing that. I was more good at controlling them. I never gave it a thought. And I was touted as being completely fearless. And I definitely felt fearless. It didn't even occur to me to be afraid, which is crazy because I was risking my life on a daily basis. And it almost seems like the media was more intrigued by my ability to control my fear than my skiing itself.
Right. Because they seem so connected because of the nature of the kind of skiing.
Right. And so the thing about, I call it repressing fear. I was really good at repressing fear, is that it works. You know, you don't have to then deal with your fear. There's like a payoff in the moment. Okay, now I can see this line. I don't have to feel fear. But you can get away with that for about 10 years, that kind of behavior, I found out. And then just your life just comes unglued, because your undealt with fear is just being pushed down in your system. It like doesn't dissipate, right? It just gets stored in your body. And next thing you know, I had PTSD because I had seen a lot of my friends die in the mountains. I had also had a lot of near-death experience, probably about 50 near-death experiences. I'd seen a lot of people become crippled for life. I mean, this stuff.
Wow.
I have dozens of friends that have died in the mountains. And I had PTSD because I wasn't dealing with the emotions that come from seeing those horrible things. And that's what PTSD is, undealt with emotion pushed down into our system that we continue to not deal with. And then I was having a lot of injuries, and that didn't make any sense, like one right after another. And the reason why is because you have to become such a rigid person in order to not deal with fear. And what do we know about rigid trees in a heavy wind? Well, they break. So I started breaking because I was such a rigid person. I also didn't like who I was because I was becoming so tough and stoic and masculine. And then I also started to become really, really burnt out because it was just so exhausting to repress that much fear on a daily basis. I just didn't have any energy left for anything else after about 10 years.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, God, it's so germane to this conversation, to this audience of emotional eaters, because, I mean, for me personally, I buried my fear. I mean, I was always terrified, and I didn't have a whole lot to be terrified about. I wasn't doing anything really extreme except eating. But I was definitely repressing fear. With food primarily, then alcohol when I started to drink, and other addictions. But I think it's very common, obviously, for people of addictive tendencies to be doing their addictive substance as a reaction to fear and as a way to try to distance themselves from the fear.
It's true. And even if you feel like, oh, I don't have much to be afraid of, life is just a really scary experience. And denial of of course we're supposed to feel fear. We come in contact with horrible people, terrible things happen to us all you have to do is look at the news to.
Right.
And we think that, oh yeah, but in the West, we live in America and it's really nice here. That's crazy. Life is a terrifying experience. And actually what I've learned since I retired as an athlete is that I wasn't fearless. Nobody is without fear. And I think the reason why there aren't that many fear specialists in the world, I've Googled it, there aren't that many of us, is because I think that we expect our fear specialists to be A, fearless, and B, somehow teach a way for everybody to be fearless. It's just not possible, because fear is in our lives every single moment of every single day in nearly every single interaction we have. And if you don't believe that to be true, you're in denial, you're trying to forget about this, horrible fact of life, that life is a scary experience. And especially if you're trying to do big things with your life, you're going to.
No question about it. I was just thinking back to my husband and I, have worked with people with addictions for close to 30 years. And many, decades ago, when we were trying to, name what our work is and what our service is to people with eating disorders, with all different kinds of addictions, we were just sort of brainstorming, and we came up with a name at one point, which was really funny, which was Fraidy Cats Anonymous, because fear is such we're self-admitted fearful people, and we know that that's so much of what drives addiction. So it's always been a running joke, I'm going to join Fraidy Cats Anonymous, because that's really what's going on. So this is great. So tell me about the transition point when you went from this stoic, hard, masculine, facade of being fearless to just beginning to soften and begin that conversation with fear.
Well, first, let me address Fraidy Cats Anonymous, because I love them. I would say get rid of the word anonymous, and then we're really on to something.
Yeah, well, that was just where it wasn't a 12-step program, so that wasn't going to work.
Right. Look at somebody that you admire, and even if they seem fearless, trust me, they feel fear. Like beneath my fearless facade in my ski career, I was actually terrified of being invisible or terrified of not being loved. And it turns out that was my motivation to become the best woman, big mountain extreme skier in the world. I tell you what, you jump off a 70-foot cliff and throw a big flip, you're no longer anonymous and people really love you. And so beneath my career, like fear actually motivated me. And I was also really addicted to fear. People call people like me adrenaline addicts, but actually I was a fear addict because beneath the adrenaline, what causes the adrenaline is the fear. And I was also repressing it to the extreme. And so I quit my ski career, even though I didn't have to. I mean, I had gotten to be so well known that all I had to do was show up at the parties and drink a can of Red Bull and I got paid. I didn't even have to ski anymore if I didn't want to, but I just was desperate to get away from the ski industry to figure out what had gone wrong. And I started studying with a Zen master, who I still study with today. I've had 15 years of intense Zen training practice to write the book, The Art of Fear, to be a fear specialist. Like that's my training. My training's not in psychology, or I'm not a doctor or a scientist. Instead, I just have real world practical experience and then a lot of training in Zen. And what I learned is that I had been repressing a large amount of fear, of course. We all stuff it down. And then my coping mechanism was to just become stoic. And for other people, I actually have a list. I call it a fight list. Like some people, they just get really busy watching TV or they eat a lot, of course, which is what we're talking about now, to not deal with their fear. Yep. They go shopping. They become obsessively clean freaks. They get super analytical. They get really in their heads. They smile a lot. They seek approval. They try really, really hard. They daydream, they withdraw, they conceal things, they compare themselves, they blame, they control. It's like I have this whole list, and if you want me to, I can send it to you later. But we spend so much of our lives just not dealing with our fear that eventually it kind of takes over our lives, not dealing with our fear. And for this audience, of course, we're talking about eating. Fear doesn't make us eat, or our emotions don't make us eat. Our avoidance of our emotions is what makes us eat. And you have these emotions and you eat. It's like maybe it's an uncomfortable feeling in your body, and then you eat, and then it kind of smothers that feeling, and you feel better. You don't have to deal with that emotion, at least for that moment. But for me, of course, it was different. And I started studying with a Zen master, and then I started resolving my own issues with fear. And then I started helping professional athletes resolve their issues with fear. And then I started helping people that had depression, panic attacks, insomnia, anxiety disorders, help them resolve their relationship with fear. And then I just finally said, this is ridiculous. I have to write a book.
That's beautiful. So awesome. And you have so much credibility because of what you've been through. You've been on both sides of the coin, and it's really awesome. Do you feel like people who have a lot of anxiety, do you feel like that the anxiety is just an outward, like you mentioned, panic attacks is an outward manifestation of that suppressed fear?
100%. We call it anxiety now instead of fear, but it's pretty much the same thing. Or specifically, anxiety is undealt with fear. Like anxiety is fear plus resistance to the fear. And like we think of the CEO on Wall Street, and he says, oh, I'm pickled in anxiety. And it's a rite of passage. Like, of course he is. Like, if he wasn't, then we wouldn't think that he was working hard enough. But he would never say, I'm pickled in fear. So we started to rename fear other things: worry, anxiety, stress, angst, nerves. Women call it nerves. Oh, I have a lot of nerves. I feel a lot of nervous energy. That's just fear. Those are just other names for fear. And in particular, if your fear feels overwhelming or irrational, or it starts to feel like it's kind of reoccurring chronic anxiety, either low or high grade chronic anxiety, that's nothing more than undealt with fear that's been pushed down and is now covertly running your life in a irrational, erratic, crazy way.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And we've seen people time and time again overcome anxiety when they started getting down and addressing, the actual fear, because it's just that backlog of fear and all the emotions that didn't get addressed, that got suppressed.
The word overcoming,
Mm-hmm.
if what I'm hoping the audience will get out of this, if nothing else, is that we should never use the word overcome and fear or overcome and anxiety in the same sentence.
Did I just do that?
Yes.
Okay.
It's the big buzzword for me, or conquering. You don't actually ever overcome these things. That's the thing. You may overcome the situation, that warranted the fear, but we don't want to ever say anything that's disrespectful to anxiety or fear, and we don't ever overcome it. Like, it suggests that we've taken out a sword and we've won some sort of war against it. We want to find a way to have a healthy relationship with fear. And one of the best things you can do is change your language about how you talk about it. So if your intention is to overcome your fear, that just leads to more repression.
Well, I think what I'm referring to is overcoming or addressing the emotions that are not just fear, but are a number of, I know as an emotional eater and food addict and addict in many ways, I had so many experiences in my past that I completely blocked out, like sexual abuse and other things that I had a mix of emotions about, not just fear. I had a lot of different, like a whole panoply of emotions that I didn't have any language or tools to deal with, and they all got suppressed, and it's just, I know for myself, fear is the overriding emotion in terms of just my experience of life. I think emotional eaters are especially wired we just have a lot of fear, and that's what I see in emotional eaters. But the range of emotions is more what I'm talking about when I say addressing or overcoming, or addressing and overcoming. It's more just really dealing with them so they're no longer needing to be suppressed.
Here's a great analogy that can really tie some things together. Like, imagine that you're Tricia, you have 10,000 children. And God forbid, yes, but bear with me, 10,000 is the traditional number in Zen. So you have like 10,000 employees in the corporation that makes up you. You have 10,000 children that you're responsible for. So imagine that half your children you've named love, joy, gratitude, forgiveness, passion. And the other half of your children you've named fear, anger, sadness, misery, stupidity. Despite your best intention, would you be able to treat all your children the same way?
I get it. No, I see that. So the naming is very important.
Well, no, here's the point. So what we tend to do is we tend to nurture and love and show off to the world these children over here. We tend to try to feed them and help them thrive,
The ones in the love category.
Right. And then what do we do with these children over here? We've been discussing it. Well, we put duct tape over their mouths. We lock them in the basement. We throw away the key. We work really, really hard to overcome them, right? To conquer them. We either run away from them or we fight them. A lot of us are trying to fight our fear. And so the conquering or overcoming is kind of in the same language genre.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Push them down in the basement. And then we think, okay, well, no, but look who I am. Look at who I've become. This is who I am, not these children. And so now I love to personify fear. So imagine that you're fear and you're a child of, Tricia. And so now you've been pushed down in the basement, you're down there in the dark with no food, no water, no love, no sunshine, no toilet paper. How would you feel living under those circumstances?
Terrible.
Right. And so fear feels terrible. And fear at this point is upset, sad, angry, more afraid than ever before because it can't see what's going on the surface. And fear, of course, is concerned for you because, you're now left without this resource called fear to keep you safe. And so fear is going to start to get more and more agitated. Like, imagine an actual child that's been locked in the basement. like that child will burn the house down in order to get out. And that's what fear has started to do. And so we have started to see fear not just as this natural, normal part of our lives, an ally, you know, something that we're supposed to show respect and consideration. It's the way that we've been treating fear that is actually causing the problems, because now fear is now covertly from the basement, sabotaging your life. Anytime your guard is dropped, it's going to come out. It's going to wake you up in the middle of the night when you're not paying attention. And you have to eat so much food to keep it down there, you know, to just smother it further. It's like, you know, the weight is like some padding that kind of is against the basement door. And if you lose the weight, oh my gosh, that son of a bitch might get out, right? So,
yep.
So it's actually, fear is never the problem in our lives. It's the way that we treat fear that has become the problem. And to the point where the only version of fear that we're aware of today is the fear that's coming out from the basement, that's tsunamiing us, that's trying to get out, that's trying to burn the house down, that's keeping us awake at night. And we're working like dogs to keep it down there at this point. And can you see that actually the problem is not the fear itself, but us in the way that we've been treating it?
Absolutely. Just like a child that we treated, you know, put in the basement, that child's going to have some serious issues. It's going to be extremely disruptive in its own life and ours.
I'm glad you brought that up, because whatever age you start repressing fear, and usually it starts the first time as a child, you say, I feel afraid, and well-intended mom says, oh, there's nothing to be afraid of, honey. Like, that's what starts the repressive madness. It's like, I call it fear shaming. You know, it's just irrational. It's false evidence appearing real. It's just in your head. It's not true. Life is a scary experience, especially to a child. So let's say you started ignoring your fear in order to get the payoff, is that mom thinks you're fearless, or, you know, approval from mom. At age 4, you started doing that. So fear has only developed, much like any child that starts getting put in the basement, you know, literally, only to the age of a 4-year-old. So your fear is now communicating from the basement at a 4-year-old level in an irrational way on top of that. And what I propose is that instead of just nurturing and shutting off these children over here, what we do is we need to have a practice where we take these children out of the basement, welcome them into our lives in an honored place. And then it's just amazing how you can see how your problems then start to resolve.
That's beautiful. And how does that, what does that look like? How do you actually do that?
Think of, on the planet, there's 7.5 billion different people. And what does everybody want? Really, what does everybody want?
Love, acceptance, approval.
Mm-hmm. They want to be seen, heard, loved, acceptance, understood. Fear is no different. And how you do that, it's like, okay, this is your fear. And usually we ignore it. We eat food to kind of put some padding in between us and it, or we fight it. You know, that seems powerful, but it's like the power that you would get if you were like Batman and you punched Robin in the face, right? Like, it's not going to ultimately make you more powerful, except for in that moment. So what instead we do is, it's counterintuitive. Instead of turning away from fear, we actually turn towards the fear and give it that love, respect, consideration that it needs. And how we do that is, because fear is an emotion. It's not in our heads. It's actually a sensation of discomfort that we feel in our bodies. And so we're taught to deal with an emotion intellectually, but you shouldn't deal with an emotional problem intellectually. You should deal with an emotional problem emotionally. And how you do that is, you need to, first of all, find the feeling of discomfort in your body. And we can do that now. Do you want to do it?
Sure.
All right. So let's close our eyes. Close our eyes and just find the fear in your body. It'll show up as anxiety, nerves, stress, worry, like I said before. Or it may show up as sadness, because fear, of course, locked in the basement can feel very sad. You know, depression is actually Latin for pressed down. You know, if you press down your emotions, then, and they're also kind of all connected, fear, anger, sadness, you know, it may show up as not fear at all, but instead as sadness. Or it may show up as anger in your body. 95% of what we know as modern anger is just undealt with fear. So find that sensation of discomfort in your body now and tell me, where do you feel it? I feel it right now in my chest, in my throat. How about you?
I don't know. I have a little lower back problem, and it wasn't hurting me, but now it's got a little throbbing in my leg. So could that be fear?
Well, there may be a physical situation there, like maybe you broke your leg, or maybe somebody that has lower back, like you have, pinched nerves or something. But there's oftentimes a undealt with emotion component to it that's exacerbating it. So even if it's a physical illness, just notice how it may be exacerbated by undealt with emotions.
Well, I think that might be the case only because I didn't feel it until we started talking.
Yeah. Well, if I have lower back pain, I have 2 compressed discs in my back. I don't have any pain. If I start to feel pain, I'll do this exercise and I'll just notice what kind of emotions it is that I've not been dealing with, honestly. And I'm lucky my lower back pain goes away the second I do that. It's interesting. So just locate that sensation of discomfort in your body and identify where it is. And the first step is to just acknowledge that it's absolutely natural and normal to feel this way. And I will say too, like I could do this with somebody and ask them to find the discomfort in their body, even if they've just gone through like a 9-day Vipassana retreat. It's there. It's always there. Fear is always there. You just have to be willing to turn towards it, look for it. You'll find it. And then the first step, like I said, is to acknowledge that it's perfectly natural and normal to feel this way. Life is a scary experience. It's not a sign of personal weakness. It's not a character flaw. We all feel it. And you do this for at least 15 seconds. And this oftentimes can just be enough. Just be enough. And so natural, normal, that's the first step. The second step is now notice your relationship with that discomfort. Are you in resistance to it? Let me ask you that. Are you in resistance to that discomfort? Do you hate it? Do you wish it weren't so?
Not in the moment. I'm trying to embrace it.
Okay. Notice you said the word trying to. Tell me that word, because you know what Yoda says, right?
Well, what I mean is because we're talking, instead of hating it, I'm just sort of making, like, I'm just being coexisting with it. Like I'm sort of embracing it.
Okay. What may happen is we may try to force ourselves to embrace it. Mm-hmm. I actually say start with where you are organically rather than trying to push the river. Like if you have some resistance to it, if you hate it, if you've been declaring war against it your whole life, you're probably going to notice some sort of like, oh, I wish it weren't so.
Right.
So first, just if not for you, then the audience, just fully acknowledge your resistance to it.
Okay.
Do this for at least a minute. Like just be fully in resistance to it without trying to get rid of that resistance.
Okay.
It's like, I don't want this. I wish it weren't so. I don't want to feel this. This sucks. You know, us humans have a long history of avoiding anything unpleasant. And so we want to honor first and foremost our resistance to it. And it's noble, you know. We don't want to just push the river is what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And this second step is just being curious about your relationship with that emotion. It's very rare that I find somebody that's like, oh, I love feeling this total discomfort, this anger, this, that, and like, very rare. So second step is just noticing our relationship with it.
Okay.
And then the third step is now, okay, you're feeling that sensation of discomfort. Now, this is how you can honor it. This is how you can listen to it, show it some love, some attention, like what anybody wants, is fear is an emotion. It's meant to be felt, not thought about. So then spend as your third, step, just a minute, let's say a minute, feeling that emotion. Just feel it. And here's the key. You do it without trying to get rid of it. And for some people, like I can do this for 15 seconds because this is something that I've had as a practice for a long time now, where I'll spend, like I remember I was driving in a snowstorm and my husband was driving and it was terrifying because we had a sports car and it was in Montana in winter and I was so pickled in anxiety and I just closed my eyes and I just fully allowed myself to feel that emotion all the way. And it just went away within literally 5-10 seconds. Because much like any whining child, those of us that are parents, like I'm not a parent, but I understand that if you turn to the child that's whining and say, honey, what's going on? You know, what do you need me to understand? Then the child calms right down. Of course, if you turn to the child and say, hey, honey, what's going on? If I give you my full undivided attention, will you then shut the hell up? You know, that's not what we're going for.
Gotcha.
We're doing this exercise to try to get rid of the fear. You just want to feel the fear. And I say, do it as long as it takes until the fear runs out of things to say. So I said a minute, you know, but for some people, it may be a 10-minute practice. And then over time, you know, you do this for a month and you may not even have to do it anymore, except for when you're starting to feel stuck again.
And this is a good exercise for any emotion, right? If it's not quite fear, if it's something else, or if it's anger, we look at it until we can see the fear.
Well, anger is interesting. Of course, anger is here to right a wrong, you know, draw a line in the sand. But the anger that we're most familiar with is the version of anger that, you know, throws people out of windows, punches holes in walls. Like that, to me, is more often than not a sign of undealt with fear. Or it may be fear in the basement, and then anger is also in the basement, and they're just kind of down there growing strength together. And then fear may ride anger, you know, to the surface like a rocket ship. It's just a matter of finding the discomfort. And if we start to interpret it or evaluate it, like, is this fear? Is this anger? Next thing you know, we're in our heads. We're not in our heads anymore. So in order to really have an honest, loving, kind relationship with these emotions, we just want to feel them. And this is a thought-free practice.
Okay.
Yeah, in meditation, you're like observing your mind. In this kind of meditation where you're having an emotional meditation, you're just in your body and you're just aware of the sensations of, in particular, I'm interested in the discomfort because that's what we're focused on right now, where you just feel it and it's done without thoughts.
Okay, so is that's a 3-step process for people that will help dissipate that fear, or not dissipate, but whatever you call it, that'll help with the fear. Help you is making peace a good way to put it? It sounds like it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You've been declaring war with fear.
Yeah.
Call it what it is. And that's what we do. Conquer, overcome fear, you know, fight, push through it. Even that is a little combative. And that's why I say it's important to change your language. Like, can we soften our language around fear? And any way that you talk disrespectfully to fear is going to be seen as a threat to fear. So what we want to do is end this unwinnable war, because I assure you it is unwinnable. It may feel like you can win a battle, but ultimately you're never going to win the war. And so instead, let's you're not going to win the war, but you can end the war by having this practice. And then, of course, after war is over, we have peace. You know, we have calm, we have joy. And now all of a sudden, instead of fear being a problem in your life, it can become an asset and an ally. And that is kind of step 2, I guess. But we're a long ways away from that at this point.
Okay. Well, I find personally, it's helped me to write when I'm when I'm jammed up about something. I will write about, I'd sort of spill those feelings out, which is a different way of, you know, I guess honoring is just to write those feelings out. But after the heat of them comes out, the upset, the anger, whatever voices are going on, when I spill those on paper, what comes up after, sort of like when all that heat has died down, what is there is fear, like the real fears that drive the torrent of emotions. And I actually had a phone call with a client earlier today, and it took about 30 minutes of ranting about a situation before the real fear became apparent, you know. And to me, it's always there. Like the fear is always there. And it's just, like you said, it's hard to admit that. It's easier to say anxiety than it is fear. It's easier to feel anger than it is to feel vulnerable fear.
You're so right. Like if you start peeling back the layers of the artichoke, it's like, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be jealousy. It could be feelings of unworthiness, powerlessness, anger, sadness, depression, all of that. If you peel it all back at the core of all this, you're going to find that fear, we blame fear for being the problem. And that's another language tweak that really needs to happen. It's actually that we're not dealing with our fear in an honest way. So
Right.
I say emotional intelligence is our ability to feel our emotions in an honest way. And that's kind of the first part. And then the second part is to use them to help us come alive. But we first have to start, really recognizing that at the core of every problem we have is undealt with fear. And I've been doing this for years. I've worked with athletes who are underperforming. I've worked with people who just can't make a decision. I've worked with people that have reoccurring injuries that won't heal. It doesn't matter what the problem is, I've learned. It could be psychological, spiritual, emotional, physical, you name it. Somebody gets sick all the time, they have like this perfect host environment, petri dish by the repression of fear for disease to thrive. Like, it doesn't matter what the problem is. The repression of fear has either everything to do with it or something to do with it.
Totally.
Yeah, we've really lost our way with regard to fear. And right now we're kind of heading in the direction where we're just trying to make ourselves even smarter and more intellectually savvy and trying to control our emotions even more and more pills and more, and of course you mentioned alcohol. It's like all these things, all these methods. We have tapping, we have meditation, 3 deep breaths. All these things make us feel better, but then we're ultimately using them to further not deal with our fear. And so the treatment actually for fear and anxiety-based problems actually is exacerbating the underlying cause. So until we're willing to go back and have an honest relationship with our emotions, it's interesting in our society where anxiety, stress, all of this is only getting more and more rampant, which is crazy because we have so many more methods and modalities and therapists and pills and all that to help us with these problems. They're just not working. And then what we realize is that the solution is actually the cause. And my favorite analogy is like you have a fork sticking out of your eye, you take 3 deep breaths and you meditate 6 times a day. You're going to feel better. But guess what? You still have a fork sticking out of your eye. We've got to deal with the fork sticking out of our eye, which is that we're not dealing with our fear in an honest way.
Yeah. So I'm right there with you, girl. And it's so simple. It's like people chase so many different solutions and they spend so much money and they're, like you said, they're creating more and more symptoms just in search of a solution. Whereas, this is like a completely, what you're talking about costs nothing. It has no adverse side effects, and you can do it anywhere at any time.
I have this language guide that is another step that I'd like to introduce to your audience.
Love it.
So that they can start to have a more honest relationship with their fear. Let me just pick a few of them. It's in my book, but let's see. I don't want to feel afraid. Like if you're used to saying that, what you can shift your language to that may change everything is I am willing to be afraid. Mm-hmm. Or I won't let fear hold me back. Sounds noble, like a battle cry, but that's disrespectful to fear. How about this instead? I won't hold myself back by being unwilling to feel fear. Another one, don't let fear control your life. Instead, change it to don't let the avoidance of fear control your life. You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah. Yep. Bringing the fear up from down in the basement. bring it upstairs.
So like another analogy could be like, okay, you have a roommate called fear. I want you to just notice how you've been treating your fear. Are you embarrassed by it? Like, speak to me, actually, like how somebody might speak to fear.
You mean in the wrong way? Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't want to feel afraid, or I'm sick of feeling afraid.
Like I'm a person. This is I love to personify fear. Like, I don't want to feel you. I don't want to be around you. Like,
right. I'm sick of you. I've had enough with you. Just get out of my life for good.
Is there any way to talk to your roommate that you're stuck with living with for the rest of your life?
Right. Yeah. No, that's pretty harsh.
So then what we then tend to do is say, okay, I'm willing to accept that you're my roommate and that there's nothing I can do about it. It is what it is. And that's a step in the right direction. But let's say you're my roommate, and if I say that to you, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, still unwanted.
Still unwanted. So yes, step in the right direction, but it's still disrespectful to fear. Or I'm willing to have you around, I guess, or I'm willing to listen to you, have a fear practice, because then maybe will you calm the hell down, right? That's also not what we're going for. What we're going for is, hey, fear, I've been ignoring you for a really long time. I'm so sorry. I've worked my butt off to just kind of not deal with you. I eat a lot of food to kind of put some padding or some sort of smothering around you. Every time you show up in my life, I run to the fridge as a coping mechanism. I see that now. I'm sorry. It's got to be really weird for you as fear. You're not so bad. I know you have my best intention in mind, and I want to just start by apologizing. And now I'm going to make it up to you by giving you some more attention and consideration and respect.
Yeah, I can see how that's making peace and not war.
And taking it back to the analogy of the child in the basement, like the second a mother who's been abusing her child acknowledges, like, oh my gosh, the child isn't the problem, it's me. I've been abusing this child. And you turn to the child and say, sweetheart, I am so sorry. Like, I have been just disrespecting you so much, and I'm going to work my damnedest to make it up to you. Can you see that immediately that relationship starts to heal?
Yeah, absolutely. My husband has said he suffered from anxiety and phobias before he hit his own bottom, and his life changed. But he often talks about humoring the fear. Like if you're afraid to fly, instead of just trying to, like you said, conquer the fear and being combative in that way, it's like you say, okay, well, we won't fly. Are you afraid to fly? We won't fly. We'll chill. We'll chill out. We don't have to go on this trip, and sort of allowing it giving it its due. In which case it has no more, like it loses its power when you give it the option, like you sort of humor it in that way. And maybe humoring is still condescending, as you might say, but at least that idea that we're not shutting it up. We're considering it's, what it's proposing that we do.
That's definitely a step in the right direction. And what I would do with somebody that's afraid of flying is I would say, okay, it's normal and natural to be afraid of flying. You're never not going to be afraid of flying because it's a scary experience. It's not some sort of weird anomaly. But if fear is showing up in an irrational, weird, or phobic OCD kind of way, that's just fear from the basement that hasn't been acknowledging, that's now screaming and acting crazy in order to get your attention. So I would help broker a better relationship between your husband and the fear and say it's natural, normal. You're never not going to be afraid of flying. So just allow yourself to feel that, acknowledge it. Fear is trying to get your attention. And the fear, that's from the basement, it's like if you've been ignoring it or trying to fight it, it's now desperately screaming, don't get on that plane, because fear doesn't think you're all that bright, right? Fear will, especially if you've been denying it its rightful place in your life. And so that's what a phobia is, or some sort of irrational fear is. Just pushed down, that's now desperately trying to get your attention. Yeah. So I would spend some time with your husband and just have him do the 3-step practice that I mentioned, and just have him feel his fear, like for a month, every morning, spend like 5 minutes acknowledging it's natural and normal, noticing his resistance to it, and then feeling that emotion without trying to get rid of it. And what I've learned in working with a lot of people is that then that fear will run out of things to say and it'll be fine. And he'll still be afraid to fly, but it won't be crippling, irrational kind of OCD fear.
Yeah, I was referring more to his talking to clients about their fear, actually, not about his.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
That's okay. But I mean, he still has fear, so that's a good suggestion for anything. Well, this is such a great conversation, Kristen. It's really, I think it's a conversation that has many layers, and so I encourage people to get Kristen's book, The Art of Fear, because it's so, this is habitual. This is cultural. Our attitude towards fear runs so deep. And so it's just so important to get as much information and to change that conversation. And I think your book will do that for people. We'll start, really changing conversation, changing the way people consider fear at all. So I appreciate you and the work that you've done and the devotion you've had to your Zen practice and really learning about this and facing it so that it can be instructive for you, and also obviously the way that you're helping other people with it.
Well, thank you. And before we go, I want to bring up something that I was thinking about your audience this morning, and hi out there. My book casts a wide net on just helping people with how fear is showing up from the basement and messing up their lives, and that what the repression kind of results in for their lives. And I was thinking about overeating, and there are definitely going to be a lot of payoffs for keeping weight on or continuing the same pattern that you're in if you're overweight. And so I made a list and because there is a payoff of repressing fear. I think back to my ski career, the payoff is that I didn't have to feel fear for 10 years.
Right.
But the cost, of course, eventually outweighs the payoff. And the question is, could I have been the athlete I wanted to be if I hadn't repressed fear? The answer is absolutely yes. I would have been a better athlete. I wouldn't have had to have recovered from all those injuries. I wouldn't have gotten to the point where I was burnt out and just desperately needing to quit skiing. And I also didn't tap into the resource that is fear to help me be more sharp and focused. And we're just starting to see athletes now who are starting to have a more intimate relationship with fear, and they're the best in the world at their sport. And then the second best on down are still repressing it. So
wow.
It's just a very, very new practice that people are just starting to tap into athletically. But for your audience, I just want to address some of the reasons why you may not start a fear practice. Can we do that before we?
Yeah, I love it.
All right. So it's kind of a long list. So I'm just going to pick out a few of them. So being overweight is my identity. I wouldn't even know who I was without my weight problem. So this might prevent you from starting a fear practice. Skinny people annoy me. I don't want to be annoying too. Without this problem, I wouldn't feel as special. My weight problem makes me feel special. I get a lot of attention from people in my life. It may be negative attention, but at least it's attention. I'm no longer invisible. I don't have to work as hard or at all because I'm considered somehow disabled. I don't trust or like other people, and my weight makes it so I don't have to engage in the world or be around other people.
Yep, I think that's a strong one.
If I don't have this overriding weight problem, then I may have to deal with another problem in my life, such as my marriage ain't so great, my job is awful, I hate being a parent, or something that we don't have to deal with because the weight is the bigger problem.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Big distraction for people.
Mm-hmm. Life is just something that happens to me. I don't have to take responsibility for my life. Life is boring without the drama of this problem. I can continue to feel like a victim and believe that life is something that happens to me and I don't have to own my life. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot of payoffs of keeping the weight around. We don't have to deal with our fear. We don't have to deal with these children down here in the basement. And so it's, courage to me is a willingness to feel fear.
Yeah.
So turning towards these things in the basement, like having a fear practice, having a discomfort practice, having a practice where you really look at the unpleasant side of life rather than just trying to mask it with more positive stuff or more food, that actually, whatever you won't deal with is the key to freedom. If you're willing to turn towards your shadow, we call it, of course, then all of a sudden that practice is going to be the thing that sets you free, and little else will.
Amen. I love it. That's beautiful. And it's so true. There's so many unconscious fears that do hold people back. And I believe that's why 98% of all diets fail, is because they're not prepared for that journey. They're focused on losing weight, but they don't realize what that involves. And it does. It involves changing your relationship with your emotions. So it's beautiful. Thank you. And I have a parting question for you, Kristen, and that's, what's your deepest hunger?
My deepest hunger is I just really want to help people. During my ski career, I just really wanted to be famous and seen as special and have people love me. My deepest hunger now, it's like I've done this radical pendulum swing. You know, I was a Red Bull sponsored promoting the sexy wild side of skiing, and now I'm just of service to other people. Like my deepest hunger is to just help people have a better relationship with fear. And your relationship with fear is the most important relationship of your life because it's the relationship that you have with yourself at your core. And if you're embarrassed by fear, you're embarrassed by yourself. If you hate fear, you hate yourself. Like I just ache to broker a better relationship between people and their fear as a way to help them, to help the planet, to make the world a better place. That's my deepest hunger.
I love it. And you're doing it. And, you know, for everybody tuning in, please pay attention to this important message and please share it with others and Kristen's book with others as well. So thanks so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure. I just appreciate you. And I hope to continue the conversation with you and with fear.
You're doing great work. I'm so glad that you exist.
Thank you. Right back at you. Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed this show and want to get free support, insider health info, exclusive invites to events, and more, visit healyourhunger.com.